Welcome to Life Science Marketing Radio, the podcast where marketing leaders inside and outside the sciences share their creative ideas and practical approaches to increasing your marketing ROI. Here's your host, Chris Connor.
Brian Morgan is with me today. He is the president of Think Deeply, Write Clearly. Brian, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. This is going to be really fun. I'm going to try to describe what you do, and then I'm going to let you probably do it better. But Brian helps people with all kinds of writing, and the name of his business, in my experience, because I'm taking an online course from him, it's more about thinking than it is about the writing. I mean, it's so that you're thinking well that what you put down on the paper is worth consuming. Now I'll let you fix that. How would you say it differently?
Yeah. I would say you did a great job. So the company is called Think Deeply, Write Clearly, and that was coined when I was working at a well-known engineering firm in New York City. And when we got to this moment where one of the biggest difficulties in that firm was the amount of time the managers were spending fixing documents. And so they sort of looked at me, I was the managing editor there, and said, start teaching people how to write. And I said, we don't have a writing problem. Everybody here went to Harvard. We don't have a writing problem. We have a thinking problem that's showing up in the writing. And that's what's killing Management Weekend. And if we're going to solve this issue, we got to solve it as a matter of looking at the critical thinking. How do we know that the things we know are true are true? And how does somebody else recognize the value of a credible statement? And then you start realizing that clear language is very different than credible language. And so I would say maybe the advancement, hopefully the advancement that my company is sort of putting into this space, and you're right, it's being used in marketing and it's being used in corporations, it's really being used kind of all over, is recognizing that there are two aspects. There's the quality of the idea being transferred, and then there's the clarity of the delivery of the transfer. And we have to handle both of them. So think deeply, write clearly. Yeah. They can be, but they most often aren't. And so let's get subtle here for a second. Information moves on the assumptions that somebody makes when they deliver that information. And so I know that's complicated, but that's sort of true. So information moves on the assumptions that we make. And so what I would say from my experience is that people who advise other people in, say, the marketing or, quote, content marketing space are advising on certain assumptions, and those assumptions are, hey, get your name out there, be known, put a lot of content out there, so volume, right? Be top of mind, and all those things are good, but then the question becomes, well, how do you deliver that information? And you can be top of mind by doing a lot of things. For instance, I know who the Kardashians are, but I will never buy, Kardashian soap or whatever it is that they sell, right? And so I know who they are, but they have not, established a lot of trust, at least with me personally. And there are a lot of people, say, on LinkedIn or on Instagram or in politics even, who I know who they are, but they have not established a lot of trust. So I would say content marketing, broadly speaking, is marketers, if I had to get cynical about it, trying not to identify the most meaningful parts of the business to their client's audience. And so they say, well, if you just simply do these 5 or 7 things, you'll be well known. First of all, I'm not sure that that's true in a very noisy market anymore. So that might even be outdated advice. Secondly, even if it were true, you can still be a Kardashian and someone isn't willing to buy your soap. And so then all of a sudden the question becomes, well, how do we establish trust with content? And that's where I think we've headed into thought leadership, where now it's, okay, while I have your attention, can I show you what I think you're probably going through, and can I show you why I approach these issues this way? Does that happen in content on LinkedIn? Yes, I would say that's the bulk of what we do, and it's the bulk of why we've been successful on LinkedIn. Does it happen in other places? Absolutely. That's what New York Times essays used to be, and some still are. That's what Wall Street Journal essays used to be, and some still are. That's what Forbes essays and the Atlantic essays, and that, right? And so all of a sudden, Fast Company, some things on salon.com. So all of a sudden you start to realize that when you start looking at it as thought leadership, it's not just look at me advertising billboarding. It's actually now, where can I go in front of my clients or other people who might need this information, where I can transparently show the quality of my thinking and be trusted with somebody's decision and help people make decisions there. And now you're into sort of thought leadership. So I would say content marketing is not traditionally that, but it can be that. And thought leadership is that plus other things as well. Yes. 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 I think it does. And I think this is almost new, Chris. I'm really finding this. So I'd actually be interested in your thoughts on this, because I just have a sense that you have interesting thoughts. But I think the funnel pages and the 45-minute webinars that people used to do and all of that stuff are way outdated now. And if we really think about what's happening, like if we really kind of break down the structure of somebody receiving content or information, there is a level of understanding that a person has and that a market has. So we'll just take dietitians are going to say calories in and calories out, right? That's like the general market noise of that. Well, that's not really new. So you can go on funnel and describe for someone, hey, calories in, calories out, and I'll help you track that, and you should pay me $1,000 a month to be your nutrition coach. And you might not get anywhere. And so now the question is, well, when they arrive on that funnel page, or when they arrive on that ad, or when they arrive, how do you display that you have pieces of information that the noise of the market hasn't told that person already? And that is something that I think we've missed, because there used to be a barrier to entry to noise. You had to pay really heavily to get on TV or newspaper ads or whatever, but you don't do that anymore. Like very, very, very dumb people can put their thoughts out there in front of you today, right? And so there's a ton of noise out there. And the real question is, when that person gets to your funnel page, when that person gets to your ad, are you displaying that you can be trusted beyond the level of the noise? And I think that is fairly new in marketing. And I would say most marketers are very late to to understanding that and compensating for that. And so I think we're looking at thought leadership being the tactic of, let's just say, the next 20 years. That it is a question of, I know on YouTube what you're going to say to me if you're mediocre. What I want to know and pay for is, what are you going to say to me if you're really an expert? And then the question, what's interesting to me, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, all of a sudden you find out that not everybody's an expert in the services they sell. And that's a very interesting thing, right? That's a very interesting thing. But this will make that clear. And I think the consumer is going to force us into that over the course of the next decade and 20 years or whatever. You probably know that we do very well, and you probably saw that in our course. And so one of the things is, well, you don't have all that many followers. How come you're doing well and you've got repeatable income and it's pretty good income and all that kind of stuff? And it's like, because the people that we are in contact with think that we are experts in the field. And I could go out to billions of people and not be an expert and get no clients. And so where is trust earned and where is fast credibility earned? It's earned in the thing that the amateur can't say that the professional can, that the expert can. And I think that our job is going to be going into the future. Let's get those 15, 30, 45 words out to the people, see the expertise that somebody's presenting to a problem. Thank you for that. I love it. Well, it's actually a reference point. It's not something that got me started, but I found it reassuring. What's interesting, David Ogilvy, as many people on your listening probably know, was one of the world's best copywriters, and if you look at his first ad, it's very long, right? So traditional marketing right now is going to say, write short stuff. There's short attention span. Let's be honest. There's short attention span because most stuff sucks. So, but if you have value to give, people have attention to give. So the real question is not their attention span. The question is your value. That seems to be lost by a tremendous amount of people who should know better, but not lost on Ogilvy. It was very long and it was very transparent. It was, I think, like, I could Google it now, but I couldn't actually tell you. But I think it was life insurance. It was life insurance, or it was bonds, or it was something like that. And it was long. It was like a half a page letter to on the Wall Street Journal. It was long, and it detailed exactly what how the bond market works and why they think that this is a good offer. And it converted like heck. And it's like, well, why did it convert like heck? Because this was someone explaining to people something that they did not know, transparently and in a trustworthy manner. But what did that person have to be? They had to be an expert. It was a piece of thought leadership. They had to be an expert. They couldn't just say, do you want to make more money on your bonds than you're making on your CDs? No, that's pain point marketing. This was different. This was transparency. And transparency does two things. It earns a tremendous amount of trust, number one, and it makes you really vulnerable if you're not that good. And it's going to do both of those things. If I can be very transparent about my stupidity, well, thank you for that. And you have been, right? Like, that can happen, right? And so if we want to earn trust, then we can earn it more quickly through transparency. And as long as people can learn from us, we can keep their attention span. But you really have to be an honest-to-God expert. And that, to me, is where this is all going. That in 5 years, people who are trading on pain points are going to say, look, I got 14 people telling me calories in, calories out, and I could pretty much do it based on myself and what I've already learned on YouTube. I need the expert to tell me that thing that I don't have. Tell me how glyconeogenesis happens in the liver so that I know when to work. Oh, okay. Like, can you play that game there? No. Then I'm going to hire somebody who can, right? That's where this is going. And I think the marketing world is behind on it. But strangely, the world's best copywriter wasn't. The world's best copywriter understood this from the get-go. We just bastardized it over time. We just forgot that that was true over time. Yeah. Go ahead. Yes. Yeah. Beautiful. So thank you for the shout out for the chorus as well. The here's what I think we're dancing around. Every sentence is inferring a structure of information. And that's okay. Language by its nature is abstract. So when I say, coffee cup, a physical coffee cup does not fly out of my mouth and you go, oh, that's what he means, right? So it is a reference point. So if we really had to break down what happens in credible communication, the question is my reference point useful to you? And if it is useful to you, but you don't know it, can I make it useful to you? That becomes the job of the writer, right? So I have to then say, okay, you might not know what a coffee cup is. Let me describe it. It's ceramic, and it's got a handle on it, and it's got structure, right? And so everything that we do has structure. Credibility is going to be the ability of somebody to detail that structure. Now, one of the things that you're inferring, I think, by the question is, well, can only really, really deep experts use thought leadership in their content? And it's like, well, yes and no. Because everybody has credibility over their observations. What they see in the world, they have every right to see. So for instance, I have the right to say, I think the world is flat. I don't know that a lot of people would agree with me, but I have the right to say it. And if you were to say, well, why do you think that, Brian? And I would say, because I look out at the horizon line and I see it's flat, and so I think the world is flat. And you might say, that's not my understanding, but it's allowed to be yours. That's okay that it's yours. So if you're worried of, I'm not quite sure that what I'm saying is deep enough, display the observation. And then I'm going to give your audience here a couple words that are going to change their lives if they want to implement this. Those words are, I've been reflecting on, or I've been thinking about, or as I look back on, those sorts of words. And you've just opened up an inherently credible space for your observations. So what's the game here? detail your observations. But if you're trying to get business through it, the audience will choose whether or not those observations are of use to them. So I can say, I've been reflecting on everybody saying the world is round. This is how I see it. Whenever I look at the horizon line, it's flat. I think the world is flat. I just think it's anti-science to say anything else. I might not get any clients, but I am making a credible statement to me. But I might not get any clients. And so I've been thinking about, I've been wondering about, I've been et cetera, et cetera. You can own the creative space, what we call the sandbox there, and then let the audience decide whether or not you're meeting their expectations for new information, right? And so that's one way to not have to handle what you're talking about right now, which is well, how deep of an expert do I need to be in order to use this strategy to show the credibility of my thinking. But did I answer that correctly? Yeah. Yeah. So the core question of language becomes, how does one person who is fundamentally ignorant transfer a piece of valuable information to somebody else who is fundamentally ignorant, right? Like now it's like, oh my gosh, how do we do that? And because we don't think of human comprehension this way, because we much prefer to think about the structure of writing this way, but not about the structure of listening or reading or comprehending. So if I was just going to say the structure of writing, then I would do what the writing teachers say, which is state the thing that you know is true. Except here's the problem. The thing that I know is true is not necessarily the same way Chris comprehends the same information. And I've got to understand that if I'm going to be credible for him and with him and together make the best decisions with him. So then what do I have to do? Pin it to I? That's easy, right? So in thought leadership, you can pin it to I. But we do the same thing with very significant organizations in the world. We're hired to teach writing at very significant, or with billions and trillions often of dollars attached to the decisions that they make. And well, how do you do it there? Pin it to studies. Pin it. Don't just state it. And this is something that I would say the politicians do not understand and the marketers do not understand. That we go on and we say corporate tax rate should be 26%. Based on what? And it's not that it's right or wrong. It's just based on what? And so you can say studies indicate, or small business, if we're going to pay down the deficit in the next 100 years, then it might need to be 28% or something, or small business employment changes at 27%, so I think it should be 26. But what are we pinning this information to? If it isn't I, what is it pinned to? At which point we start to realize that all of this stuff, all of the writing stuff, was built around, I want you to know what I clearly think, and that was useless to you. What was actually helpful to you was the stuff we never learned how to say, which is, what are the assumptions that I am making? What are the assessments that I am making that say, this is why I think it might be useful? Chris, you seem to be a guy who cares about the tax rates. Let me explain to you how I'm looking at the situation, or how studies have dictated that maybe the optimal tax rate might be around 26% as I see it. Let me just, or as the Federal Reserve sees it, or as the government sees it, or as the Democrats see it, or the Republicans see it, or whatever. But let's put it into language so that it's pinned. And when we don't recognize comprehension, we don't do that. And I think we create more noise than we create decision-making power. Yeah. So there are a couple different things in play. One of them is quite strategic, which is what the marketers call brand positioning, and I think it's important. But let's put brand positioning in a thoughtful, aligned way, which I think is more appropriate for you and for me than how most marketers would talk about it. So, so let's call brand positioning the thing that you know and can do and can help people see or do that nobody else in your business can. Let's call that brand positioning. Sometimes that's not actually the service itself. Sometimes that's the approach to the service itself. And so, for instance, a roofer might have exactly all the same stuff as the next roofer who comes to my house. And the costs are very similar. But one of them sat down at the dinner table with us and said, I was up on the roof. This is what I'm seeing. This is where I bet you're having trouble. This is where I think we need to do this if we're looking short term. This is where I think we're going to need to do this if we're looking long term. Where are you budget wise? Where are you? Right? And the next roofer would come and says, yeah, I was up on the roof. It's going to be $2,000. I can fix it. Probably the same tool, right? Probably the same tool, probably the same quality of work, but one of them earned more trust. And so what I would suggest to you as you do this investigation for yourself, if you don't mind me coaching you here in front of your clients, is what I would suggest to you is that it's not just the service, and that's what the niche people miss, right? All those marketers say, you got to find a niche. They end up saying really like ridiculous things in order to find a niche, which is dumb, right? And so often it's not the service, which is where most marketing advice goes wrong. It can be the approach to the service, and it can be the thoughtfulness of that approach, and it can literally be the data points that you're willing to share with them to display your credibility in the area that nobody else maybe even knows. And so go back to the roofer for a second. The roofer might say, yeah, it's going to be $2,000. And they haven't shown a thoughtfulness of approach that makes me doubt whether they know the exact angle or will care about the exact angle of the nails that they're using. But somebody who's showing a very thoughtful approach, I can say, I bet they're going to do everything they need to do to put the nails in the exact right way, right? And so sometimes the thoughtfulness of the approach can carry that brand positioning with us. Does that answer your question? That's all it is. That's all it is. Yeah. 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 Sure. There are a couple different things. Let's start with the highest level, which will probably be the most useful to your audience. The expert is the person who can get deep quick. So that's the person who, inside the initial attention span, can say, I think this is probably from my experience. Let me detail why I think this is. I think this is probably what's going on, and I think this is probably why you're having the issues you have. Does that sound reasonable to you? And they go, you nailed it, right? So the expert can get deep quick. Deep quick infers a bunch of stuff. And what it really infers is that a whole bunch of thinking has been done before the mouth started opening or the pen started writing. And so deep quick, if we actually look at brain science here, you have to be very practiced to be deep quick in anything, right? And so an enormous amount of practice is inferred by the person who is deep quick. Here's the problem with a lot of executives or whatever. We know most information subconsciously, and we cannot say things that we know subconsciously because language is a conscious expression. And so if that's the difficulty that we're faced with, what's the only thing we can do? Mine that subconscious understanding and get some language to it and say, wait a minute, you've got this instinct that this proposal going through the conference room right now is nonsense. That it's not going to work well for the company. Oh, you got this instinct, but everybody seems to be going for it. And you got to say something, right? Well, if we don't have the practice of what are the observations, what am I noticing, if we don't have that practice, if we don't have a history of that, all the things that we teach in that course that you're in, if we don't have a history of that, then I might be tempted to say, this is a really dumb idea, right? And the conference room goes, why? And you go, because it's just dumb, right? And it's like, oh man, that did not work out for that executive at all. But the instinct was probably right. So then the question is, how do I say the same thing using all of that observed language? Do you guys mind if I share my observations on this, because I think it's going to help us make a better decision? No, I don't mind. And then you got to know it. Right? Then you got to know it. Then you got 30 seconds. And you got to be able to say it. You seem to be making these assumptions about the audience, and that's why you think that this is going to be a profitable endeavor. But I don't make those same assumptions about this audience. And when I look at this offer, I think it's actually more headed toward this than for that. And this mishmash right here, it looks like it's going to be easy, and I don't think it's actually hitting the mark. How are you guys hearing that? And now what have we said to that room? If they're going to say, oh no, we need to go with this original plan, they've got to have a better argument than I do. So I've got to have that ability to present the best argument in the room quickly. And we don't. As humans, we don't. We're very good at recognizing when something's wrong. That's stupid. That's wrong. You're dumb. But we're not very good at putting into language why we think it's wrong. And so that's the goal, right? And that's executives, and that's teams, that's everything. And that's also thought leadership, right? When somebody says, well, how do you know that when you work with that, say, a person who wants executive coaching, how do you know to express them that way? Or how can they learn how to trust you? And the answer is because you have to be able to display the observations and the assessments that you're seeing. And you have to be able to do that quickly. And so there are a whole bunch of people who have instincts for that, but they don't have the language for it. And at the end of the day, the credibility of the service and the quality of that service is going to be delivered through its language. You got it. Yeah, and let me just dive in with that for a second because I think you'll find it interesting. What we start to realize is that we don't actually transfer our knowledge, right? If the human condition is one ignorant person transferring to another person, we don't actually transfer our knowledge to that person, and that's a fairly difficult thing for a lot of people to admit. But once you admit it, you get an enormous amount of power in the world. And honestly, it's funny. People don't want to admit that because they want money and they want to know that their services are good. The way to get money and to know that your services are good is to admit it. And then all sorts of wonderful things happen from there. And so we think we're selling our knowledge, but we're really not. We're selling the assumptions that we're making. And we're transferring the assumptions that we're making to someone else. And they can check in on those assumptions. And what they're really saying is, when I get under there, are you still the deepest person in the room? Are you still the person who's going to lead me through the best way to make this decision at the executive board or whatever? That are you still that person? And if we're aware of our assumptions, we have an enormous amount of financial and political and relationship control. Awesome. So here's what it is from my point of view. Instinctually, there are factors that go into a decision, and there are weights that we are applying to those factors. So, for instance, you and I probably both voted in the last presidential election. I won't ask, don't ask me. And there are reasons that you voted for the person that you voted for, and there are reasons that I voted for the person that I voted for. And now there are millions of factors that go into that decision. I mean, your savings, the tax rates you like, you run a business, you don't run I mean, there are millions of them. And if I were to ask you, you'd probably come up with 2 or 3 key ones. Well, what we're really saying is Chris is applying a lot of weight to some of the factors, probably subconsciously, that go into this decision. So he has applied weight consciously or subconsciously to certain factors more than others. For me personally, I always think about who is the person that I trust to make decisions, which isn't always the person that I trust on issues. This is just the way I vote. I'm not saying anyone else has to vote this way, but it's the person that I trust to make decisions, because there will be decisions of war and peace, and there will be decisions of tax rates, and there will be decisions of, and I don't want any of that done by rote. I want all of that done with a really thoughtful process. So I put critical thinking as a factor that I vote on. And I do that not with the president, I do that with the dog catcher. But that's how I vote. You might look at it very differently. So we have these weights that we are applying to things. Those factors and weights, the real question that the audience is asking on anything that we state, do you understand all the factors? Have you considered them all? And can you explain your weights? When you've got that, you've got the thinking part done. And now it's, who's the audience, what's the expected critical response, etc. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's where I sit in comfort. Not everybody does, but that's where I sit in comfort. Yeah. Right. Right. Love this. Story. Engineers get mad at me when I say this, but they can't deny it. Story and data are the same thing. And so if we really think about what is story, it is an interpretation of observation or an interpretation of data. And sometimes data is third-party tested and done in the laboratory and that sort of thing. And so the scientific version of that is your hypothesis, right? If we wanted to really sort of break it down that way. But that's what it is. It's a collection of data, meaning that I'm going to test in the world in a data. And so data, to me, and this is something that we miss, does not have inherent value. The only value that data has is how we assess it and make use of it. And when we understand that, we begin to say, okay, how does that apply to our language, and how can I show people the necessity of the data that I have collected, or the use of the data I have collected, if I want to, say, get more funding, or I want to get people interested in this project, or etc. And that's going to come through story. That's not going to come through data. And I think that's largely misunderstood, and even in the scientific community. It was awesome. Thank you so much for this, Chris. It was awesome to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Hey, if you're still listening, that tells me you enjoyed the podcast. But don't tell me, tell your friends, and I'll be back soon with another episode. Okay, you can tell me too. Send an email, chris@lifesciencemarketingradio.com. Bye-bye.